Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening and welcome to Golf Talk Live. I'm your host, Ted Odorico, broadcasting live every Thursday, 6 to 8 p.m. Central from Panama City Beach, Florida, home of the world's most beautiful beaches. I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for joining me on my weekly broadcast. Every week, I'll feature some of the best instructors, coaches, authors, and entrepreneurs in the golf business today. I begin with a great discussion on Coach's Corner, followed by an insightful interview with my special guest. So let's get started by introducing tonight's Coach's Corner panel. All right, good evening, everybody, and once again, welcome to Golf Talk Live. I'm your host, Ted Odorico, and we've got a great show for you tonight, this Thursday, October 15th. It's hard to believe. It just seems like October rolled around here not too long ago, and we're already pretty much at the middle of the month. So I don't know where the time's going, but it's certainly going by pretty quick. Again, thanks, everybody, for joining me. We've got a great show for you tonight. We're going to be starting off here in just a moment or two with a great discussion on the Coach's Corner panel, and I've got three absolutely phenomenal golf coaches and teachers here on the panel tonight, and I'll introduce those guys in just a moment. And a little bit later on the show, I've got a really interesting guest. His name is Nicholas Hool, and he is the founder of the Hoolest Performance Technologies. And I'm not going to spill the beans, as I say, quite yet, but what he's really sort of discovered here and is in sort of the testing mode right now, I think it's going to be very, very interesting, not just for the golf industry, but for athletes, if you will, or the athletic industry in general. So I think you really want to stick around and listen to what he's going to talk about here tonight on the show after the panel discussion. Just a reminder, of course, Golf Talk Live is brought to you by the iGolf Sports Network and, of course, Golf Tips Magazine. iGolf Sports is a live stream broadcast and media production company providing top-quality programming designed to attract the golfing enthusiast. And, of course, Golf Tips, the game's most in-depth instruction magazine, offering insightful reviews on the latest equipment, tips from top PGA and LPGA teacher professionals, all designed to help improve your game from tee to green. So subscribe today at golftipsmag.com. And just to let the folks know, something I wanted to wait until it was 100% official, effective immediately, you can also get a digital-only version of Golf Tips Magazine. For those of you that prefer a digital version, in the past you had to actually purchase both the print and digital version together. You couldn't get them separately. So now you can get either just the print, you can get the print and digital, or you can get just strictly a digital copy. And the best way to do that is go to, again, to golftipsmag.com. And actually, if you go under the subscribe button on the print edition, you'll see that is now an option to get the digital-only version there. So check it out, and I hope you'll subscribe. It's a great magazine, lots of great articles, and, of course, always some great tips from our top 25 instructors. All right, I'm going to introduce tonight's panel and bring everybody out, and then we'll begin tonight's discussion. As I mentioned, I've got three great guys on the show tonight. First up is John Decker. He's a PGA instructor and motivational speaker. He's also a senior editor and top 25 instructor with Golf Tips Magazine. In 2015, he was the Southern Ohio Teacher of the Year, and he was the prior head instructor at the Grand Cypress Academy of Golf, where he worked under top 100 instructors Fred Griffin and Phil Rogers. He is the author of Golf is My Life, Glorifying God Through the Game, which, of course, includes a company Bible study. Also on the panel is Peter Agazarian. He is the owner and director of performance for Northeast Performance Institute, also the owner and president of Northeast Golf Performance. And in 2017, he was the Northeast New York PGA Player Development Award recipient, and he's also a TrackMan Master and a proponent group member. Rounding up the panel, of course, is Alex Fisher. He is a PGA Director of Instruction at the Glacier Club in Colorado. You'll find him there in the spring and summer months. And he's originally from Nottingham, England. And back in 1999, he moved to Naples, Florida to pursue a career in the golf industry. He and his wife now later moved to Arizona, and he, for a while, was the instructor at the Phoenix Country Club, also at TPC Scottsdale, and Director of Instruction at TPC Las Vegas. But currently you'll find him as the Director of Instruction at the JW Camelback Golf Club in Scottsdale, Arizona, during the winter months. And he's now also a Golf Tips Magazine top 25 instructor. So, guys, welcome to the Coach's Corner panel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ted.
Thanks, Ted.
All right. Appreciate it, guys, as always, giving of your time. And I hope we have an interesting discussion tonight. And really, it's for the most part, it's really going to be about you guys, particularly, and obviously a little bit from your perspective towards your students. But primarily, it's going to be about you guys. And I'm going to pitch it in the order that I introduced you, of course. And I think we'll start, of course, with John. So what I want you to do is I want you to think of two things, John, and I'm going to pose this to each of you, of course, that made you the teaching professional that you are today. So I want you to think of two things that stand out to you, and you can include an individual as certainly at least for one of them. If somebody was instrumental in making you who you are today, by all means, you're welcome to do that. But I want you to think of two things that made you the teaching professional you are today.
Well, first of all, Ted, thank you for having me on the show. And Peter and Alex, I look forward, as always, to being on with you. Well, if I'm going to, this is a great question, Ted. I would have to start, first of all, with my parents and the upbringing I had. My parents taught me how to help other people, being a good citizen, doing the right things, hard work. And being a teacher, you ultimately have to care more about your students' game than your own game. Because if you're worrying about your game, you're not going to be a very effective teacher. So when the point came when I knew that my playing career was over and I was going to be a teacher, I think a lot of the lessons that I learned from my parents, I would have to include them. If I didn't, I would feel terrible not to mention them. And then I'm going to throw two people in that I've started with at Grand Cypress, and that's Fred Griffin and my mentor, Phil Rogers, two men that are top 100 teachers. Of course, Phil died a couple of years ago, but two just great teaching instructors who taught me the technical aspects. I knew how to play. I thought I did at least. But they taught me so much more about the game and really learning how to find the root problem in every golf swing. And every golf swing, there's finding that root problem. I think back to my early days when I first started teaching, and I would look at a golf swing and I would see a bad shot, and I would start wanting to work on maybe their club path or whatever. But ultimately, it came down to finding the root problem in their setup. And a lot of times as students out there, students don't want to work on their setup. They think that they need to work on their golf swing. And really, if you can find the problem in the setup, then everything else kind of falls into place. So if I had to put those two, looking at my parents, the influence I had with them, and then, Phil Rogers and Fred Griffin, I would say that was what inspired me to be a teacher, because I never grew up wanting to be a teacher. I never thought of being a golf instructor. And then when I spent time with them and really saw how they did it and the professionalism that those gentlemen had and still have with Fred, it's just been a great experience. And I couldn't have asked to have a better upbringing from my parents and from Phil and Fred.
Very interesting. Well put and well said. Peter, what about yourself? What are two things that you think were instrumental in making you the teaching professional that you are today?
Well, I would say first my experiences as a youth athlete and as an athlete in general. And the coaches I had as a youth athlete, absolutely blessed to have the coaches that I had, not only head coaches but assistant coaches, actually in the National Hall of Fame for their respective sports. So absolutely shaped my approach towards developing golfing athletes. There's, especially on the youth end, and then, even senior golfers that are active or have been athletic, it helps me appreciate the mindset of an athlete, the strengths, the assets that an athlete or someone who has been athletic has. And then the other piece is, the many people I've been fortunate to be around as a professional, and outside of golf as well, that I've learned exceptional lessons from, on many things from technique to motor learning to just having a overall sense of empathy for the person that's in front of you. And the person that's with you right then is the most important thing right then, and I'm there to listen, to help guide, and just to simply answer questions. I mean, I can't really pinpoint just one person out of the many that have helped me.
Well, I think that's another great answer. I think it's always important to to recognize that even though we are on the teaching side of things, it's amazing what we learn from some other people, whether it be growing up, and just in our own development as an athlete and just as a human being, how those influences can affect and ultimately benefit not only us as human beings, but also the people that we interact with in our teaching profession. So very good. Alex, what about you? I know you've got a couple things. I'm sure that when you look back and you see that it's made you who you are today as a teaching professional.
No, thanks, Ted. I think growing up in England, we back in the 80s, golf was not a really big sport at the time. And so for me to start playing golf, a lot of the credit goes to my parents for just encouraging me in the first place. And the golf course that I first started playing at is called Ruddington Grange, and that's in Nottingham. And the head professional there at the time, Robert Ellis, was a big influence and mentor on me, just because I took a lot of lessons as I was a kid. And just watching him in the background and seeing not only the fun that he was having teaching, but also, seeing him help other people, that was a big influence. And as I went through middle school and high school, and I would have career meetings with different teachers, and they'd always talk about what do you want to do when you're older. I always said that I wanted to be a golf professional, and of course you would get the sniggers and the laughing and things like that. But at the same time, I was always told that I wasn't able to do that, and it was kind of a pipe dream, and really what should you do? And so after 15 minutes of arguing and being a stubborn kid, I finally said I was going to restore classic cars and do those things there. But it wasn't until I ended up in Naples, Florida, and working at a golf course when I was interning. The head professional there at the time was Chris Pace, and I've kept in close contact with Chris over the years. My first day, Chris said to me, "Okay, so what do you want to get out of this internship for 6 months?" And I said, "Well, without being kind of a suck up, I kind of want to do what you do." And he says, "Well, let's make that happen." So it was the first time moving to the U.S. and actually having somebody say that you can do it. And so that was a defining moment for me, because I actually had somebody accepting that I could get into the golf industry, and there was a path on how to do that. I think as I fast forward and as I've crafted my teaching skills, I've had a number of mentors that have helped me over the years. And I think the golf industry is a very unique industry where we are out to help each other. Whereas if you look at the car industry and things like that, I can't imagine that you'd have one manufacturer helping another manufacturer. But we're always open as PGA professionals to help each other. And so over the years, I've had probably my biggest mentor is John Hughes, that I'm sure you're obviously aware of.
Mm-hmm.
He's been part of your shows in the past, but not only his integrity, but also his business acumen. He's been a mentor and always will be a mentor for me. And then more recently, a person who now is in the Miami area, his name's John Stolschmidt, and he was the director of instruction for one of the TPC properties I was at. And same thing, it wasn't just about teaching, it was about how to be a good teacher personally, professionally, and had a big influence on me. So I feel fortunate. I don't have all the answers, but I look forward to continuing those relationships with those two gentlemen, and then continue to get better.
Wow, another great answer. What a fantastic job you guys did on really bringing out, I think, what it means to not only be a great teaching professional, but a great human being, recognizing all of those that have helped pave the way to your careers. And if it wasn't for I need you guys to stick around for a little bit longer, I'd say we could just end the Coach's Corner segment with those three answers right there, and I could move on. But unfortunately, I need you guys for a little bit longer. But great answers, guys. I really like that. All right, John, I'm going to pop back up to you here, and we're going to go through the cycle again. And this one's a little bit different take. We're still, none of us are retired yet. We're still plugging along and doing our thing, and obviously moving into, in some cases, some uncharted areas. So now I'd like you to think of two things, and if you can't think of two, that's fine. You're welcome to just stick with one. But generally, I'd like you to find two things that you would still like to accomplish as a teaching professional.
I think the one thing that I want to accomplish the most is I've had some meetings with Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and I want to develop a program that, because you know my passions, Ted. You know that I love teaching, but I love the Lord, and I want to get out and go to a community, come to a community, and have a golf clinic. I want to start a Bible study, and I want to do public speaking, and try to bring in other great teachers who have the same passions that I do, who want to grow the game of golf, but also want to lead people in a Christian walk. That is what I think I've been called to do in my life, and that's what I want to do with my life, and I will pursue that until the day I die. So that's pretty much, I don't really have anything else. From a career standpoint, obviously I want to write great articles for the magazine, and I want to do great lessons, and I would love to have tour players. But I've been on the PGA Tour, and I've done all that, and those things are not. There's more to life than that. And I just feel like that we all have a purpose and a calling in our life, and I feel like that's the calling that I have.
Well said. I like that. That's a great answer again. Peter, what about yourself? Can you think of a couple things that you'd still like to accomplish? I'm sure there's probably many more, but are there two particular that maybe stand out to you that you would like to accomplish as you continue on in this great profession?
I'm a little more in line with, just continuing to help people. I'm right now kind of living out the vision I've had for my career for a long time. Since I really discovered a passion for coaching and helping people, what I'm living out right now is really what I saw as a purpose, and how to reach as many people as possible. I think the pretty boring answer is to keep doing what I'm doing.
Not at all. I think it's great. The real key, and I'll get to you in a second, Alex. The real thing I think is what I'm hearing, here, not just from you guys, but from many others that have been on the show, is teaching the game is only really one aspect of what we do. It's the relationships that are developed, and it's ultimately helping other people. Golf is just a vessel that we all have chosen to use. Golf is a game that we're all passionate about. We enjoy the challenges, the ups and the downs, the pitfalls. It's exciting to us. But ultimately, to become a teacher professional, whether it's PGA, LPGA, or some other form, it is really about interpersonal development and inner connections with other folks. And that's what we enjoy doing. It's giving what we've learned along our journey, and obviously pertaining to golf, and we want to share that and help somebody else have a similar experience. And that's really what it's all about. So that's a great answer, albeit I don't consider it short. I consider it right to the point, Peter, and well said. I think that when you find your passion in life, whatever that may be, I think you have to follow that passion. And because I think if you don't, then you cheat yourself. And I'm glad to hear that sort of resounding commonality with everybody is about.
Expand on that? Can I expand on that last point you just made? It would have been it would have been very excuse me. It would have been very easy for me to stay where I was, to stay living where we were, and it would have been very comfortable. It would have been really great. But when you have an opportunity come across your plate like I've had afforded to me, and you don't take advantage of it, this is the one that you're going to look back when you're 85 and regret it, that you didn't take the chance. That's the piece that I can't stress enough to people. If you look at, and some of you don't know what we're doing, and it's pretty expansive in the state of Connecticut and New England, but you have to take a shot. It's not always going to work out well, but you have to take a shot. You have to take a risk. It might make it a calculated risk, but take a shot at it. The worst thing to possibly do is to not do something and regret it.
I couldn't agree more. And again, well added point. I firmly believe that as well. I think opportunities come for a reason. Doors get opened for a reason, and you have to make a decision. And I agree. I'm much like you. I would always hate to look back and say, I wish I had have taken that opportunity. And sometimes I know I've probably taken more opportunities than I probably deserved or should have, but I don't regret any of them. Alex, what about you? 2 things that you would still like to do or feel that you need to accomplish as a teaching professional. What might a couple of those be?
Sure, and I'm definitely going to piggyback on what Peter said. I never envisioned 25 years ago that I would be living in the U.S. and doing what I'm doing now, and I definitely am living out my dream, but I do kind of stick to a kind of a goofy saying of never settle, never compromise. And so for me, the cop-out answer would be to grow the game. I've been fortunate enough to work with some higher profile players and things like that, but really just trying to grow the game and make it simpler would be the second thing. I think this game has become a little bit too complicated. There's information is a good thing, but it's a powerful thing, and there's probably too much information out there that possibly contradicts itself. But being able to get people out playing golf more, not just through juniors, but through women's golf as well. We do a lot of women's programs here, and if we can continue to grow that and get them out here, I think the numbers of participation will just keep going up.
Again, you guys are. If we were playing baseball, you have all hit it out of the park once again. Again, it just goes to show you that there are some really great people in this industry, and really what it personifies is it's not about us, it's about you, the folks listening out there, the folks that we deal with every day. It's about how can we make your life better. We just simply have found a tool or a vessel, as I mentioned earlier, that we enjoy doing, that we want to share with you. And we know that once you learn and have a better understanding of how to play, you're going to enjoy it just as much, if some cases maybe even more than us. And sharing that knowledge and working with people and helping people is probably the most rewarding part, I think, of this job. We could all be out there, playing golf and doing what we want to do and do something different, but it's a whole heck of a lot more fun sharing what we've learned through our careers and helping you to become better players. So that's, I think, first and foremost, I've heard tonight is really reaching out and helping other people. John, we're coming right back up to you again. And a little bit of a different twist. I want you to kind of look a little more inside yourselves, and I want you to think of 2 things that you've learned from yourself during your career.
I think the one thing that I've learned is that I'm a very persistent person, and that in some ways is good. in some ways can be bad. I now look back when I was a junior golfer, I didn't have a driving range. I didn't have really a golf instructor. I learned by going out and playing on a public golf course, and I would go out there by myself and I would hit 4 or 5 balls off the tee, and I would play all 4 or 5 balls until dark. And not until I got into my mid to late teens did I start getting any kind of organized instruction. And then when I got 25 and I moved down to Orlando and I started working at the Grand Cypress Academy of Golf, and I realized that my golf swing was not what it needed to be. When I finally got technology where I could see my video and all the bells and whistles, I revamped my entire golf swing. And from 25 to 28, during those about 3-year period, I totally revamped my golf swing and then started playing on the mini tours and playing and just kept pursuing it and pushing and going as hard as I could and teaching on the side and then teaching full time and playing on the side. And then finally, getting to the point when I realized that, playing was not going to be my avenue. I just think that the persistence that I have is something that I think has benefited me because when it really all came to fruition when I wrote my book, because my book was 78,000 words. I never wanted to write a book in my life, and when that is the most difficult thing I've ever done. It took me 4 years to write, and there were nights when I literally was like, why am I doing this? And I just didn't think it would come through, and it did. And so I pushed through, and that's something I'm proud of. But in some ways, I can also see how being persistent can hurt you on the golf course because you try to force things to happen. And I try to relate that in some of my failures on the golf course to my students and letting them know that, when you're out there on the golf course, if you can't make a birdie happen on the first tee, you can't make an eagle happen. You have to let them come to you. You have to just play one shot at a time and allow that to come to you. And when you get behind, you can't just make it up. Or if you get ahead, you can't just run out the clock. You have to still play one shot at a time all the way till that last putt on the last hole. And so those are the things. I think the thing that I've learned most about myself, and there's really second, I can't think of something off the top of my head, but that persistence, when you asked the question, that was what really popped into my head.
That's okay. I know it's, one thing I give all of you guys credit real quick, and then Peter, I'm going to turn to you, and they can all attest here, is I don't give anybody the answer, I don't give anybody the questions for the panel discussions up front, so it's not like everybody has a chance to rehearse it, so or get their thoughts together. This is live, real, and you're getting the questions, for the first time tonight. So I know it's not always easy sometimes to, to always think of everything right off the bat. But you guys have always, for all of these years, I've been doing the show. This is my 8th season doing Golf Talk Live and 7th season for doing Coach's Corner. John, you've been here for several seasons, as has Peter. And I know, Alex, this is you're newer to the panel this season, but you guys have really been able to dig deep and come up with some great answers to these questions, and very, put a lot of thought into it on such short notice. So I give you guys credit. Peter, what about yourself? What are some things as you look and reflect up to this point in your teaching career? What have you learned, do you think, from yourself that, again, maybe your students could benefit from, or just in general, what have you learned from yourself as you've navigated through this career?
I've learned far more from my mistakes than anything else. I would say turning professional at 19 and starting to teach and being in your early to mid-20s and being exceptionally young, and you're going to inherently make mistakes. And I learned an incredible amount from those mistakes. And fortunately, they were nothing that was to do with anything other than, professional boo-boos, we'll call it. Clearly didn't break any laws, didn't do anything bad. But as a professional, I learned, over time that there was very important, ways to speak, just small things. But when you're working at the the private club level that I was, at a very young age, from 23 to 26, and you don't really know exactly what you don't know yet. And it's okay to make mistakes. Small mistakes are learning points. I think later, as I've gotten into my second decade as a professional, I learned that I'm willing to work harder than anybody else to get where I want to go professionally and to help other people. Some people think I'm a little crazy with how much I work, but I enjoy it. It's not work to me. I get to see my family, which is wonderful. It's the most important thing. But I would say those are the 2 points: is small, non-illegal mistakes to learn by and to shape your future choices that you can make, and to be willing to work harder than anybody. And if people think you're crazy, maybe you just might be onto something.
I like the emphasis on the small, non-illegal. That's why I'm kind of laughing to myself. But you're exactly right. Peter, we learn, and as John touched on as well, we learn from, not necessarily just the mistakes, but, obviously everything doesn't always work out perfectly. When we're, I like to call it the trial and error. When you're in your teens and early 20s, it's kind of the trial and error period of your life. You're testing things out. You're, dipping your toes in the water to see if it's hot or cold or how deep it is. And, you're not always going to have certainly major successes. But the key thing is that you learn from those and you learn to adapt and adjust in order to, keep on going. And I think that, from what I'm hearing, and I certainly can attest, I've heard, many nights that you guys have been on the panels, we're always growing. And, as it was mentioned earlier, we learn from one another. This is an industry, unlike really other industries, Alex, I believe you mentioned this, where, unlike some industries that certainly we compete in a sense, we obviously have our own businesses, we're doing our own thing, but we're always willing to help our fellow professional. And that's a rarity in business. Usually it's a little more cutthroat than that. And I think this is a business that has really stood up there and is willing to reach out and help one another in many cases. And that's what we do here on the panel discussion and in the interviews that come on Golf Talk Live. Alex, what about yourself? As you reflect back thus far in your career, what are 2 things that you think that you've taken away from yourself?
Sure. I would say that just like Peter, I've made mistakes in the past that I've learned from. I think about the lessons that I gave almost 20 years ago. I think they were probably not the best showing that I ever did, because I think as you get into teaching, you're trying to teach the whole teaching manual in 1 hour, and it's easily to kind of go a little bit overboard. I personally had to change my verbiage so I didn't sound like I was totally from England and was using words that most people probably didn't understand. So that was a little bit of a learning curve for me as I went along. But I think, as I did start teaching, I kind of had to realize that I couldn't just assume that people knew what you were talking about, or you just couldn't take it for granted that they were to take everything in. So I've learned over the years that less is more when it comes to teaching. So I think that's definitely a thing that I've learned over the years. And then really, for me, it's adapting to different situations quickly, being fast on your feet, being able to adapt to different learning styles. I was at Pinehurst a couple of years ago for a U.S. Kids seminar, and before we went out there, we were sent out a personality test before we actually got on property, and was really a set of 10 questions that I really didn't put a lot of effort in, admittedly. And as we all sat down to look at these different reports on our personality tests, I completely snooked at everybody else because my test was all over the place. But it actually turned out to be a good trait for instructors where they're able to adapt and adjust to different learning styles. And then really just finally, I know this is more than two, but I'm going to ramble on anyway. When I was playing, I mean, dealing with pressure when I was playing was, I think as you're younger and your hormones are going and things like that, when I was playing at a high level as a teenager, it was hard to adapt to. But as I've got older, and I stress this to students now, that pressure is a good thing. And pressure shows you that you really care about the situation, and obviously you want to do well, so don't let pressure get to you. And if you can do something that makes you feel uncomfortable, that's a good thing.
I couldn't agree more. And just very quickly before we move on, I think as we grow older in life, I think we, are able to reflect back. And when you're young, you have obviously much more energy and much more enthusiasm for a lot of things, and you haven't really. You don't know what you don't know at that point. And as you develop your skills and make those adjustments and tweaks and all of these wonderful things, you begin to realize and you see a pattern that it's not so bad. When you're young and your team loses or you lose a match or whatever the case is, you're thumping your club in the dirt and you're kicking some turf up and whatnot. You're upset, you're angry, and you're disappointed. But it's only afterwards when you realize, that you're learning something in that moment, and that it begins to say, you know what, hey, that's okay. That was just one bad shot. I've got plenty more shots here that I can work on in the rest of my round or whatever the case may be. So I think it's important distinction that, that we all as professionals, that we learn most importantly about ourselves, and that we bring not just the good, but we bring the bad too. And that doesn't mean we teach the bad, but we use what we've learned from our mistakes, because I guarantee it that most of the people that we're teaching have made similar or just as silly or foolish or however you want to phrase it, mistakes as well in their own lives. And one of the things I think, and Alex, you mentioned this about sometimes teaching can be very, very difficult, and sometimes we don't keep it simple. I think one of the things that can be very intimidating, particularly for newer students, is they look at us as professionals and, we don't make mistakes and everything's perfect. And I think once we sort of bring ourselves to that human level that we make mistakes too and now we're going to help you learn from some of our mistakes and help you work through some of yours, I think it brings us to a different level and people appreciate that much more. All right, the last question I've got for each of you, and again we'll go back through the order here, John, is when you're working with your students, I want you to think of two things that you want your students to take away from your teaching.
The number one thing that I want them to understand is the root problem of what we're trying to get out of the lesson. Because, I think, Alex just mentioned that at times as teachers we can give too much, and I'm as guilty as anyone of that, where sometimes, especially if you got someone who's doing pretty well in the lesson, you feel like, okay, I can push this student a little more because they're grasping what I'm trying to get them to do. And then the next thing you know, you're 30 or 40 minutes in the lesson and, oh my gosh, I've given them too much. So, you learn how much to give the student is just experience more than anything. But having that student, when they leave the lesson, have an idea of the number one thing that you want them to work on. Because if you're not careful and you give them that number one thing in the first 5 or 10 minutes, and then you work on the number 2 and the 3 and the number 4, by the time you get to number 10, if you've given them way too much, they've forgotten the main thing that they really need to work on. So that is the one thing that I want to make sure. And so what I've been doing with a lot of my lessons is at the end of the lesson is I'll have the student pull their phone out, and I'll do a little recap right there, or I'll email them a video recap of their lesson, and I'll say the number one thing that you need to work on is this. The second thing is I want every student who comes to take a lesson with me to leave with at least one drill, because the drill is their medicine. That's their homework. I say, you've got to practice this drill, because this drill is going to help that problem that we've identified, in the first part of the lesson. And then usually the students will find that, we have to stay on those drills, and we sometimes have to revert and go back to the number one problem, because a lot of students don't practice between their lessons, unfortunately. And so, when we go to the second and the third lesson, we're recapping a lot. So I try to really instill in them the importance, especially with the juniors. I tell the juniors, listen, your parents are spending a lot of money for you to come take lessons with me. You need to practice between the lessons. Otherwise, you're not going to benefit. Your parents are going to be wasting their money, and you're not going to be as good as, I know you can be. So I think practicing the drills that I give them is the second thing that I really try to emphasize.
Great points, and well said, John. Thank you. Peter, what about yourself? A couple of things that you want your students to take away from their experience with you as a teacher professional.
I'd like them to take away an understanding of why certain things are happening, why they hit, what they do to hit good shots, why certain bad shots are happening, and the ability to regulate themselves on the golf course. I think it's fascinating to ask the question to a person who's, any other golfer than a beginner golfer that already hits good shots. And 99% of people cannot answer why they hit good shots. I ask every first lesson I have. I ask them, you hit good shots, correct? Yeah, I hit sometimes. Do you know why they happen? What you do to produce that shot? No idea. That's 99% of people. I get maybe 2 or 3 people a year on varying sides of the scoring spectrum, usually a better player, that has their finger on it. But a lot of times they don't have a feel to associate with it. They don't understand their own game. And, if somebody's going to leave their time with me, I want them to have a deep understanding of their own game. I'm an outlier where I have hundreds of model swings from LPGA and PGA Tour players on TrackMan, and I don't use a single one. I don't compare my players that are any level of golfer to a professional golfer, because we're not striving for that. We're not going towards right and wrong. We're going towards a deep understanding of their own game so that they can play golf better. We're not there to learn how to play swing. We're there to learn how to play golf. And if they can't right the ship when they're on the golf course for when it goes wrong, because it's not it's not a point of if it goes wrong when you're on the golf course, it's when and for how long. And it's much more productive to help people get it back quicker, where it can be sometimes one swing and you understand it and you say, okay, here's a baseline that I can go to that helps me have that be maybe the one bad shot instead of a 3-hole stretch, 18 holes, a week, a month, an entire season. A lot of times people, if they don't have an understanding of their own game and why certain things are happening, they can be floating in the current for a long time and have nowhere to swim towards. So if that's the question leaves me, I want them to have some understanding of what they do well, and on the other end of the spectrum as well, to why certain things are happening when it's not going well.
Well said, Peter. That's extremely important. A lot of times, we all hit bad shots, And it's not about, as you said, it's not about perfecting the golf swing. Obviously, you have to have an understanding of fundamentals and so forth. But, it's really playing the game. It's learning how to play the game of golf. And when you're out in the golf course, you don't have, the benefit of a perfect lie or depending on where you've hit it, there might be some obstacles in your way. It could be a tree branch. It could be a whole tree, what have you. So you've got to be prepared for that, and you've got to be prepared to adapt and adjust accordingly. And when you hit a bad shot, it's just one shot. Don't let it perpetuate and turn into 2 or 3 or 4 or several holes. And teaching our players how to know how to deal with situations like that at a quicker level, I think is makes it for a much more enjoyable game when they're able to think their way out as opposed to just trying to manipulate what they're doing. They're actually able to think their way out of any situation they're given. Well said. Alex, we're going to let you wrap it up here with this question as well. A couple things you want your students to take away after they've been with you on the lesson tee.
Sure. I think we're all on the same page here that we want to better educate our students. Again, a lot of times they come for a lesson, think they're doing one thing, but clearly it ends up being something else. So being able to provide a clear, systematic approach of how to accelerate their learning and get better, I found that is key. I think if you can explain to them kind of the path that we need to take now, maybe next week, and then down the future, and how they're going to get better, I found that just seems to work the best. So laying out kind of like a roadmap of sorts of how they're going to improve. Every student that I work with will leave with that. And then really, to be honest, just to make sure that when they do leave, not only do they understand what they're working on, but get them enthusiastic. Get them excited about practicing and showing how these improvements are going to drop the scores. Typically, taking somebody who's trying to break 100 to 90 can be done pretty quick. Getting somebody from the 90s to 80s can be done pretty quick. But if you don't have a plan, then those goals aren't really attainable.
Yeah, and that's the key. And I think something else that I heard mentioned a few times throughout tonight's discussion, and that is keeping it simple first and foremost. It's great. We learn a lot of things as teacher professionals. We attend seminars. We've gone on courses and so on and so forth, and we get a lot of information. But that doesn't mean that we have to share every bit of that information with our students. That's there for really two reasons. It's to educate us so that we have a better understanding of what it is that we need to do when we're working with our students. And it's also to make it so that we can educate our students, but in such a way that we don't overwhelm them. To go to, John, what you had said earlier on, too many times we see, and again, I think as you develop in your with your experience and as we all age a little bit, as I mentioned earlier, I think that wisdom comes with it. But I think too often we see a lot of professionals earlier on in their career try to sort of expel too much information. They're excited about it, and I get that. And I think what happens a lot of times is the student ends up going away with a sort of an overwhelmed feeling, if you will, and they're not able to grasp everything. There's too much information. There's information overload. I want, when I'm working with somebody, I want them to go away feeling that they want more, but at the same time, I want them to go away with an excitement and saying, I'm really jazzed up about what we learned today, what we talked about today, and I want them to be in such a way that they're enthusiastic to go out and work on some of the things, John, as you mentioned, and the others, to work on some of those things that we talked about. The worst thing that you can do is it's like inviting somebody out for a meal, and then you push them in front of a buffet, and you say, have at it. Well, there's a lot of choices there. There's a lot of food there, and you don't want your students to gorge themselves, for lack of better words. You want them to, have a good meal, so to speak, but not so full that they come away feeling to the point where they're sick. And I've seen that too many times. And that is, if you talk to a lot of students out there, that is a pet peeve of theirs, is that they don't understand. They want it simpler. They just want to know how to do this, or they want to know how to do that. They don't need all this other technical mumbo jumbo. That's there for us to utilize and learn from so that we can be more effective teachers. But that doesn't mean that we have to now turn and educate them with every nook and cranny that we've learned, because otherwise, they're just, again, going to become overwhelmed and less apt to be enthusiastic to come back and continue on their journey. All right, guys, I hope you guys found this an interesting discussion tonight. I know it was, as I mentioned at the top, it was about you guys, and really to take a sort of perspective look at yourselves and share what's brought you to where you are now in your career. And I know that you're going to continue to tweak and modify and adjust as you continue on and develop more and take more risks and reach out there to become even better professionals than what you are right now. So on that note, I'm going to go through reverse order this time. And Alex, I'm going to go to you, and then Peter, and then John. As we wrap up, let the folks know the best way if they want to reach out to you, and if there's anything, final comment that you want to make.
No, Ted, thanks again. I always really appreciate being part of the show. This was awesome tonight. Best way to get a hold of me, you can either go through my website, which is alexfisherpga.com. My email is alex@alexfisherpga.com. And then my direct line is 602-363-9800. The temperatures are finally cooling down here in Scottsdale, so it's definitely a great location to come out to. So I'd love to see you out here at Camelback at some point.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Alex, and thank you for joining us on the panel tonight. Peter, how about yourself? The best way that the folks can get in touch or reach out if they'd like to?
Yeah, thanks, Ted, and thanks, guys, for sharing time with me today. It's always great to be on with other, great coaches, and great to hear your thoughts. I always learn a lot. People can reach me. You can go right to the website first. It's gonpi.org, or you can reach me at peter@gonpi.org, or check me out on social. I Google pretty well. My last name is not easy, but I'm sure if you copy and paste it from all of Ted's social posts, you can find it. Thanks so much, guys.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you. John, what about yourself?
Well, thanks again, Ted, for having us on the show tonight. Peter, as always, I enjoyed being on with you. And Alex, it was a pleasure being on for the first time with you tonight. I'm in the Columbus, Ohio area. If you're in the Columbus area, feel free to reach out to me. I teach at the Westerville Golf Center. I also do online instruction. You can reach me on social media under John Decker Golf Instruction, and I spell my first name Jon, so John Decker Golf Instruction. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Also, as you know, writing for Golf Tips Magazine, the article Fairways to Heaven, which I'm really enjoying that, Ted. I appreciate the opportunity. And my book, Golf is My Life, Glorifying God Through the Game, it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble websites, and also on Walmart.com. And if you're looking to start a Bible study or need public speaking, reach out to me as well. But again, thanks, Ted, and I appreciate all that you do in giving us this platform and opportunity.
Well, as always, it's my pleasure, and it's me that's actually grateful that you guys are giving of your time. I know it's not always easy when you've been teaching all day or doing other things and have family obligations as well to be able to do that. So I appreciate it very much. So Peter, John, and Alex, thank you very much for joining me tonight on Coach's Corner. I look forward to having you guys back real soon.
Thanks, Ted.
Thank you.
All right. That was my very special guests, John Decker, Peter Agazarian, and Alex Fisher tonight on the Coach's Corner panel. And as I mentioned in a few moments, I'm going to be joined by Nick Hool, who is the founder of Hoolest Performance Technologies. And as I said, he's got something very interesting that he's going to share with everyone tonight, I think you'll find quite intriguing, to say the least. And I hope you'll enjoy tonight's very special interview guest. I'll tell you a little bit about him just as I wait, and just to give you kind of a heads up, and then we'll sort of stand by. As I mentioned, my special guest tonight is Nicholas Hool, and he is the founder of Hoolest Performance Technologies. He's 26, and he grew up playing competitive golf with dreams, as many have, of playing on the PGA Tour. But like many golfers and or athletes, he struggled with performance anxiety in golf during high-pressure situations, and his scores, unfortunately, like many of us, often reflected it. He tried many methods to treat his performance anxiety. When he was 16, in fact, he was even prescribed anxiety medication. But after a few short weeks, he stopped taking it because of some of the negative side effects. So a little bit later on, as he worked with his experience with the performance anxiety in golf, it led him to study the neuroscience of human performance and the anxiety response in athletes at Arizona State University. He completed his bachelor's in biomedical engineering in 2016 and recently completed his PhD in the same topic, also at ASU. As part of his research, he developed a non-invasive nerve stimulator, basically a drug-free technology that reduces performance anxiety in athletes and other individuals who experience moments of high anxiety, including those with clinical conditions like PTSD. So whether you're a golfer or not, this is going to be a great discussion tonight. He's done a lot of research, his team, if you will, and with some of the others at Arizona State University, and he's come up with a really great device, and we'll get a little bit more. It's still in some early stages. They're still doing some final testing and so forth, but some of the results that he's going to share tonight have been really quite impressive. And he's obviously, because of his golfing background, wanted to bring it to the golfing world, if you will. But he says it's not limited to golf. It can be used for other athletes and other areas of anxiety and high stress, if you will, like PTSD, as I mentioned. So when he comes on, I will bring him out. Let me just remind everybody, again, if you're just tuning into the program a little bit late, if you are interested in a subscription to Golf Tips Magazine, if you go to golftipsmag.com, and under the subscription section, you can subscribe to either the print and digital version, and now available is the digital-only version. And you can access that if you go under the print edition section, and if you click on subscribe, you'll see on the form that the option now is available for either a 1-year subscription or a 2-year subscription for the digital-only version. So if you're somebody that prefers a digital-only version and maybe you like to save a few trees, you can do that now at golftipsmag.com. And we are going to be coming out here in just a few weeks, in fact, a little over a week, the latest edition, which is the special issue or holiday gift guide issue, will be hitting newsstands here in about a week's time. I believe October 24th is the date that it will be hitting newsstands in around that date. And you'll be able to get that in addition to some of the great articles and other tips that are available. You will be able to see some great gift ideas for that golfer in your family. So make sure you check it out. Again, subscribe to the magazine. It's a bi-monthly magazine. There's 6 issues per year. I'm already, myself and the gang, we're already working on the January-February issue, getting all of the articles and tips and so forth together. We're piecing that together. But the latest one is just, which is the holiday gift guide, the 2020 holiday gift guide, that has gone to the printer and should be on its way out to subscribers as well. They obviously get the first copies coming out, and then it will hit newsstands in just a little over a week's time. All right, I see that my guest is here. I've already introduced him, so let me bring on this evening's special guest, the founder of Hoolest Performance Technologies, Nicholas Hool. Good evening, Nick, and welcome to Golf Talk. Welcome to Golf Talk Live.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. It's cool.
All right. Well, I appreciate you taking some time, and that was perfect timing. I've already done the introduction before you came on to save a little bit of time, so we can talk about what you're doing, and here we are. So let me, as I mentioned in your bio, obviously, like many of us, you grew up playing competitive golf, and ultimately wanted to get out on the PGA Tour and battle it out with some of the best out there. And we'll get into some of the specifics there, but just tell us a little bit about your golfing experience growing up as a youngster. When were you first introduced to the game, and did you, at a very early age, kind of have aspirations of getting out there and getting more involved?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm 26 years old. I'm from Tempe, Arizona, and I still currently live in Tempe, Arizona. But Arizona, big golf state for junior golfers like myself, and just golfers in general. A lot of tour players out here. But I grew up. I was, pretty much since I could walk, I was swinging a golf club around. I've got a picture of myself, next to my dad's golf club when I was a little kid. It's taller than I was, and I'm still trying to swing it. So, been a golfer since I was born. Never really. I don't know when I decided I wanted to play competitive, but I just remember my favorite thing growing up. There's a driving range in Tempe, Arizona called Shalimar Golf Course, and they have these old, like, broken down beater cars out there in the range, and I just thought it was the most fun thing in the world to try and hit them. And they got the golf carts out there picking up the golf balls, and they don't seem to mind if the kids try to hit the balls at the guys in the cart. And to me, that was just so fun. I don't know why I had so much fun doing that. And maybe, I don't know, when I was 7, 8 years old, started playing in some little kid tournaments at that golf course. And then when I was 9 or 10, started winning some of these little local tournaments. And I think at that time I was still too young to really decide if like, I want to be a golfer. I think my parents probably just noticed, like, hey, he's got some talent. Let's put him in some tournaments. And then I won a local tournament when I was 14 years old. And then that's kind of when I realized, like, oh, I'm actually not bad at this. Maybe I should take this seriously. And so I think right when I went into high school, when I was 14, 15 years old, that's when I decided I'm going to, give this my best shot and play every day, practice every day, and see if I can, go play. And I mean, ultimately the PGA Tour, who didn't want to play on the PGA Tour when they were growing up? But
right.
That's kind of a pretty high level kind of description of my background and how I got interested in golf.
So let me ask you, obviously, that was some of the competition. Did you get into, when you got into, further education, did you play on a golf team? For those that are, tuning into the show, what was sort of your highest level of competitiveness that you got into? And then we'll continue on.
Sure. Yeah, I did not play in college. I stopped playing right after I graduated high school. Not necessarily because I wasn't, good enough to play in college. There were plenty of schools I could have gone to play for, but I guess when I was 16 to 18 years old, that's when I was playing my most competitive golf. I'm sure you're familiar. A lot of people probably are familiar with the American Junior Golf Association. That's kind of like the PGA Tour for junior golfers. And I was traveling the country, playing in tournaments. Never won anything on the AJGA tour, but had some decent finishes and got on the radar of some college coaches. But my ultimate dream, like ever since I could comprehend what college was, I always wanted to play at Arizona State University. Guys, Phil Mickelson came out of there, Paul Casey. There were a ton of big name players. John Rahm came out of there. But when I was growing up, I thought Phil was awesome, and of course Tiger Woods. But just being from Tempe, Arizona State was the dream, right? And actually, when I started talking to college coaches, I was talking to a handful of them, and I got on the ASU coach's radar. And he, back in the day, it was his name was Randy Line. He was there, and I was talking with him, and he was making me feel good, and basically told me I could play on the team, and I thought I was set. And then something happened. Maybe we could dive into this later, but that's kind of when the serious anxieties started kind of affecting me. My game started suffering a little bit, and ultimately that was the reason why I didn't go to college to play competitive golf. Not because I wasn't, physically capable of doing it, but the mental side just took its toll. Got burned out, was tired of practicing so many hours a day and not, shooting the scores I was capable of shooting, and very much, because of the anxieties of, performing at the highest level that was affecting me.
Yeah, and that's what I want to talk about now. I wanted you to kind of lead up to that before we really got into this, because this is really an important area, that they're really starting to talk about more and more in golf. For years and years, we always, heard about, the mental game and that, but people didn't really understand that. We heard a lot of time, over the years, people would refer to Nicholas, about having a strong mental game, and, people didn't really understand that. And now in more recent years, as there's so many professionals out there, not just your swing coaches and that, but coaches that are dealing into certain areas, and obviously you're going to get into it a little bit more, but there comes a point in time in a golfer or any athlete really in their career where they're going to be faced with what you would refer to as a performance anxiety. They're out there under the pressures of not just competing, but performing at their best because they're trying to win the event or a tournament that they're in, or even just the day, depending. It could even for a club golfer, maybe playing in a club championship. But at a higher level, those anxieties, and people don't see that. When we see golf on TV, we see, oh, so-and-so hit a bad shot and that, but we don't know what's really going on inside their head during that. You discovered at that point, as you just pointed out, that you began to struggle. You kind of got burnt out. You were having, performance anxiety issues in golf, and the pressure was sort of mounting, and it began to affect your scores. So explain a little bit, if you can, as best as you can, really what started to happen for you. And obviously it's different for everybody, but what kind of started happening for you? You were out there and you were really doing good. You were getting on the radar, but then suddenly things just kind of, for lack of better words, went south. Talk a little bit about what happened to you in your experience.
Sure. It is different for everybody, but something I've learned just in the last couple of years or so talking to people is, while it's different, it almost affects everybody. Like almost every golfer has experienced performance anxiety like I did. They just don't like to talk about it because it's like a sign of weakness, or they feel like it's a sign of weakness. It's like, oh, I was so nervous, but I don't want anyone to know that. And it's like, well, look, everybody gets that nervous. It's literally normal. It's just some people have it really bad, and there were some moments for me it was bad. I think there's a few memories that come to mind that stick out, and I think just it always started on the first tee. Like first tee jitters was my biggest thing, and if you get off to a bad start in a round, it's you can come back, but it's just so frustrating because it's like, oh, here we go again. I'm 4 over after 3 holes. So I got to come back again. Typically, the first time I remember this happened, I was in Florida playing a collegiate or a large junior tournament at PGA National, which alone that's a tough golf course, but just the stage of it was pretty big tournament, and I felt great, had a great practice round, and the next day, they feeling good, feeling normal, had a good warm up session. They call my name, walk up to the first tee. And I don't know, what happened. I just remember, I don't want to say I blacked out, but I, was just like, where am I? What am I doing? And I just thought, oh, shoot, I've been up here. I may have been up here just standing on the tee box for 5 minutes. I should probably swing and hit my golf ball. And, it was such a bad feeling. I could care less where the ball went. I was like, let's just get off this tee. And things like that started happening, a little more often. And it would result in, literally the amount of balls I'd hit out of bounds on like the first tee shot, in rounds. It's hard to count. But, man, when you do that consistently over time in tournaments, it is so demoralizing after a while. You're like, wow, what am I going to do today off the first few holes? And that's just the kind of mental side of it, and it doesn't mean that I forgot how to hit a golf ball. It's just, when you're nervous for some reason, it's hard for me to say why I got that nervous. When I was a kid, I didn't have those problems. I'd go out and I could shoot in 60s, any day. But, later in my career, when I was in high school, just something about maybe thinking about my future, I'd get anxious. And, the first tee jitters, that was definitely the most physical kind of anxiety I could feel, shoulders are tense, my heart's beating out of my chest, things like that. But it would last, into the round as well. In the middle of the round, maybe you're coming back, you bomb a tee shot on a par 5, got a short iron into the green, thinking, all right, I'm gonna make an eagle here and bounce back. All of a sudden, it's like, oh shoot, I'm all nervous all of a sudden because like I've got a chance to come back, and then everything goes south again. So just little things like that. I mean, it's hard to explain where it comes from, but it's not uncommon at all, for a lot of people to feel that way.
Yeah, and Nick, the reason why I wanted you to really talk about that is because, as you said, it affects everybody, obviously different degrees and some worse than others, but every golfer struggles, particularly with first tee. Even the best of the best will tell you in a tournament, especially if they've had a few weeks off, they're stepping up for the first time, maybe in a few weeks, and especially now with this season with COVID and tournaments, being a little more scarce for a while. These guys have got to come back out, and the one saving grace is they didn't have as big of a crowd out there, so they were able to kind of ease back into it. But those first tee jitters happen for everybody. But there's a lot of, I'm sure, college players and junior players that might be listening, or their parents might be listening, and they know or they've spoken to that junior player, or maybe one of our golf coaches that was on earlier, maybe has a student that's experiencing the same thing. So this is why, what we're going to talk about tonight is so important, because it is very common, and it is something that I think that a lot of people misunderstand, and it's something that we're still continuing to learn about in all aspects of sport, but particularly in golf that we're going to talk about tonight. And I want you to explain, because typically when we hear of somebody that's having some sort of anxiety or stress, or however you want to phrase it, and this is something that a path that you actually went down, as I mentioned in the opening bio, that you went on, and I want you to maybe explain a little bit about that. When you were very young, in fact 16, it was thought that, well, we'll prescribe some anxiety medication. This will help sort of balance things out. You obviously didn't have a great experience and actually stopped it relatively quickly after doing it because of some negative side effects. Touch on a little bit about that, and then I think what we'll do is after you've explained a little bit about that process, we'll be able to get a lead into what it is that you're doing and a solution that you feel you're well in the way of coming to help folks overcome some of these issues that we're talking about.
Okay, sure, yeah. So when I was 16 years old, I'm trying to think when exactly. It was in the summer when I was 16. I played a round of golf with a guy named Jeff Van Raphorst. I'm not sure if you've heard of that name, but he was the quarterback in the 80s at Arizona State when they won the Rose Bowl, and played a round of golf with him, and he noticed that, I had a lot of talent, but something mental, was affecting me. I was lacking the mental focus, and he actually sent me to his sports psychiatrist that he used when he was in college, who helped him mentally prepare to win the Rose Bowl. And I went and saw the psychiatrist, and it was mostly about how to train yourself to visualize, yourself out there hitting perfect golf shots, how you should be breathing properly when you're in pressure situations. And that training is invaluable. It's so important to practice, visualization training. And I can talk about that at some point too, if you want, or why that's important. But as a psychiatrist, he also is able to prescribe medications. And when I was telling him about my experiences, almost blacking out on a tee box, or like my heart is beating out of my chest, that's a very common thing for a lot of athletes. And I still to this day don't know why he prescribed me this, but he prescribed me a beta blocker, which is extremely effective at keeping your heart rate low when you're in those pressure situations, but also a reason why it's a banned substance in, I believe, at least in the collegiate performance levels or competitive levels and above. But I took those for, before a couple tournaments, and it worked so well on the first tee. I mean, I didn't feel a thing on the first tee, and it was amazing. And I was like, wow, that's great. I got off the first tee feeling good. Started my rounds off pretty well, but noticed like I was dead tired, after 9 holes. And I'm just like, man, what is up with this? Like, I'm just like, I don't feel energized at all. And that's a side effect of it, right? Like, that's a very common side effect. People feel very drowsy, very sleepy. And who knows, it could have been I took too much of it or something. But all I know is it was never meant to be a long-term solution anyway. They're not good for your health if you're on them consistently for even a few months at a time. But that experience, understanding that, wow, if I could at least just get my physical symptoms under control, I can go play this game the way I know I can play it. And that really did, spike my curiosity into what drug-free methods and devices or technologies are out there that can, help keep the physical symptoms low. Because I knew, we're never going to ultimately get rid of nerves or, people being nervous. We're not going to be able to take away the grand, nature of being in a tournament or being in a position to win a tournament. We can at least keep the physical symptoms under control, because for a lot of people, when your heart is pounding out of your chest and your muscles are so tense, you can't make a motion. You can't expect to hit a golf ball the way you should be able to. And I would argue that, Tiger Woods always said he was super nervous when he would, had putts to win tournaments, but it was never so bad where his whole body would just freeze up, right?
Right.
And that's kind of the extreme side of the performance anxiety that I wanted to study and understand, and to see if we could reduce those things without medication.
And you went on to, and that's why, I wanted you to mention that. And again, I don't want to, we're not here to dispel any medical advice or anything of that nature. If your doctor has prescribed you something, I don't want you to suddenly to stop take it. So for anybody listening out there, I'm not suggesting it. This is just strictly, I wanted Nick to share his experience, and what really, in effect, led him to this next stage, and that was to really study, the neuroscience of human performance and anxiety responses in athletes. And you did that at ASU, and as I mentioned, and you received a bachelor degree in biomedical engineering, and also recently just completed your PhD in the same at ASU. So this actually led you to want to study things a little bit more. So through your studies and through your education on this very area, what were some of the things that you had learned about the brain, particularly, and what function it plays in regards to golf and other athletic performance or anxieties that you sort of discover were happening and why they were happening?
Sure. So my studies when I was at school, my first 4 years, I always, when I was in my undergrad, I always knew I wanted at some point to get into, device development or mostly device development, something that would interface with the brain, that would essentially, turn off the anxiety response or turn on your relaxation response. And it really took me, the whole 4 years to really understand what technologies are out there. So there wasn't a whole lot of, I didn't really study the brain from like neuroanatomy or anything like that. I was more so focused on a technology or a method called neuromodulation, which is just any, technology or any method that modulates brain activity. So just, a way of changing how the brain is working or firing. And some of the technologies I was looking into, you've got a popular method called transcranial magnetic stimulation, where you put a magnetic coil up to your head and you send in these magnetic, impulses, and the magnetic waves cause the neurons in your brain, which, they communicate via electricity, to communicate with each other. You can either, increase brain communication with this technology, or you can actually cause neurons to stop firing if you want to with this technology. So in a sense, things like that, I thought, well, what if we could locate where anxiety originates in your brain and just shut it off for like 5 minutes? Like, how awesome would that be? And it's, it's a simple thought, but turns out the brain is extremely complicated, and anxiety is not quite localized to one area. There's a ton of factors that influence how, anxious you feel in a certain moment. I know one particular brain structure called the amygdala is what controls your fear response. So anytime, you're in a state of fight or flight, you see a lot of activity in the amygdala, because that's what kind of activates your fear response. And so the thought was, well, maybe we can shoot some electromagnetic waves into your amygdala and turn it off right before you step up to the first tee. Like, how awesome would that be? But turns out the technology is extremely complicated. It's not portable at all. These magnetic stimulators take up, a room. They're like the size of a computer, a refrigerator. And, it's just not practical. There's other methods. You could use ultrasonic, energy to, you send in ultrasound waves into your brain to modulate brain activity. But the method that I decided I would use is a method called vagus nerve stimulation. And so the vagus nerve is part of the automatic nervous system. It's a nerve, just like your brain is made up of a bunch of nerves or neurons. And so the vagus nerve is part of that nervous system that's made up of neurons that directly communicates with your brain. And the vagus nerve specifically controls what's called the parasympathetic and the sympathetic response. So parasympathetic being your kind of rest and digest state, while your sympathetic is that fight or flight response. So when you're in that state of high anxiety, your sympathetic is very active. And there's a lot of studies that have shown how the vagus nerve, when it's electrically stimulated artificially, that it reduces sympathetic activity. And as a result, you see things like heart rate come down, blood pressure comes down, muscle tension comes down. And really all the symptoms that I was experiencing when I was in a state of, performance anxiety, it seemed that vagus nerve stimulation was, having a positive effect on reducing those symptoms. And so that was the technology I decided I was going to focus on in my PhD, especially because it's a very simple technology, honestly. The there's branches of the vagus nerve that are superficial to the skin around your ear and in your neck that you don't have to have any implant. You can access them just by simply pressing an electrode against your neck or in your ear, and you just send little electrical impulses, and these electrical impulses activate the vagus nerve. And as a result, we see the physiological effects of, vagus nerve stimulation. We see, immediate reductions in heart rate. We've seen in my golf studies that I performed with the technology, we saw muscle tension was reduced in the shoulders, which was really interesting. We've seen, just changes in heart rate variability, EEG activity, blood pressure, things like that. And so to me, I wouldn't quite say I'm an all-out neuroscientist. There's still so much I need to learn about the brain and how it works. But I really zeroed in on this one particular technology of vagus nerve stimulation, and my specific focus was to design it so that it was easy to use and comfortable for athletes and everyday people that are just looking for drug-free acute anxiety relief. Hopefully that answered your question. But
yeah, no, that was perfect. And Nick, I just want to point something out here, just to go back a little bit, because what I find very intriguing about this, and again, I'm not trying to discount anything else out there, but as you pointed out, one of the problems that you found with medications, particularly, is it worked great up front, but one of the side effects was that it actually worked too well, to the point that after a certain period of time, you became, for lack of better words, lethargic and not really as responsive. So, it was great for the front nine, but the back nine, Nick was sort of MIA, if you will, in layman's terms. So if I understand what you're talking about, this technology, you've created a device, as you're leading up here in the discussion, that is essentially going to do the things that need to be done. This is what the studies have shown with the vagus nerve, and being able to turn off, if you will, or stimulate, for lack of better words, that nerve, which ultimately is going to, sort of squelch some of the anxiety and nervousness, again, however you want to phrase it, for the average golfer, without having those same side effects. So in other words, you're going to be able to accomplish what you need to accomplish, but you're not going to have an issue where, whether a medication or some other performance stimulant is causing you at some point to kind of almost come down a little bit, and now suddenly you're not able to perform at all, let alone be anxious about it. Am I understanding that? Am I clarifying that correctly, or?
Yeah, that's pretty much spot on. The interesting thing about vagus nerve stimulation, really the technology, it's the same thing as a TENS unit, or transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation. So if you're familiar with like eStim or any type of TENS unit, it's been around for maybe 40-ish years or so, where you can place electrodes on your skin. So you're typically on your back, and it just applies electrical impulses to help treat pain. So our device uses the same technology. We just redesigned it to have a much simpler and more comfortable experience. But the cool thing about this technology is there's no side effects. The worst side effect you'll get is some skin irritation where you've applied the electricity, but that lasts 10-15 minutes at the latest. If you were to use this device and it were to have a serious effect on you, where say your heart rate dropped below baseline and maybe some other physiological symptoms were reduced, if you stood up and did some jumping jacks or some push-ups, you'd be right back to normal. Because we're not introducing a foreign artificial substance into your body that's having a long-lasting effect, we're simply turning on a process that's already, part of your body. And then once you take it off, it doesn't have lasting effects really beyond 20, 30 minutes when you remove it. Unlike a drug, you got to wait for it to clear throughout your whole system, which takes, up to 4 hours usually.
So let me ask you about the device itself. So I'm assuming obviously it's fairly compact. You're not lugging, a huge machine out to the golf course. So it's something fairly compact, I'm assuming. And when typically, if a golfer has, which again, as we've talked about earlier on, we all experience different levels of performance anxiety in that. If a golfer was, let's say, playing in a tournament, let's use a PGA Tour player or an LPGA Tour player, and they had an event coming up, for this weekend, is this something that they would, typically do before they head out for their round, and how far ahead typically, would you recommend? Has that been sort of, worked out yet? And how long is the process? Is it something that just, it's a few seconds, it's a few moments, or it's an hour process? Just give us some general guideline.
Sure. So the device is portable. It fits in your hand. I don't want to talk too much about how it works, just because we're still pursuing.
Right.
We're still in the clinical phase, and we're not quite able to make any specific claims just yet about it until we get FDA clearance. But it's designed, to be portable, to be taken with you, and for an athlete, or let's just say golfers, for example, I know you're not allowed to use electronic devices during a round, so you wouldn't be able to use this in a tournament, but you can use it all the way up to right before you tee off. So considering how it's not, going to have, beyond 30 minutes of lasting effect, ideally what you would do is, if you do struggle with first tee jitters, the best use case would be, use it as close to when you tee off as possible. But it's also something that, you don't necessarily want to be like walking around while you're using it, because of, like, you want to let the device do its work. So ideally, maybe find a quiet space, sit in a chair or a couch or something, and just use it for 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how long you feel you need it. And then, hopefully do that, 5 to 10 minutes before you tee off, and go tee off. And it should at least help you get off the first tee and get through the first hole without any serious, performance anxiety. And for a lot of people, that's all it takes. Just get off the first tee, get through the first hole, and you can get your round going and get into a groove. And everyone knows, all it takes is one bad starting hole to ruin your round. If you make double, triple bogey, it's like, oh, great. Now I got to fight back for the entire round, which is, it happens a lot, and you see it a lot. But when you're experiencing a double or a triple bogey on your first hole all the time, man, it's mentally draining. It's like, oh, here we go again. So, yeah, I mean, right. As close to the first or right before you do something is ideal.
Yeah, and obviously, like anything, you can't be used, as you said, during the tournament itself. But you're exactly right. You talked about earlier in your own circumstances where, getting off to a bad start for you was difficult because it would tend to perpetuate as the round went on. The first hole was bad. Now the second hole is bad. You've got double anxiety because the first couple of holes are bad, and it just starts to build momentum from there. So, you're right. To get somebody, ideally to get somebody in a position where they're, sort of eliminating that first tee jitters and getting off to a good start is going to build confidence. That doesn't mean you're never going to have bad shots or you're not going to ever have a bad round again. That's not the purpose. The purpose is obviously to reduce the anxiety levels and the performance levels, if you will, to such that kind of gives yourself a fighting chance, if you will, for lack of better words. Now, and as you mentioned, and I'm glad that you brought it up, I was going to bring it up, but this is something that you're obviously working right now full-time to get FDA clearance through your Hoolest Performance Technologies, your company, and you're obviously ultimately wanting to, which I found really interesting, is obviously, we're talking about golf and based on your experience in golf, this is something that you would like to be able to apply, particularly to competitive golfers, but ultimately, everyday golfers that struggle with that at their home course would benefit from it. But it's also something that you can see in application with other clinical conditions, including ones like PTSD, as an example. Maybe touch on that a little bit as well.
Sure. Golf's definitely my passion, and human performance in general is something I've always been interested in. How can we maximize human performance, from a mental standpoint, from a brain optimization standpoint. But when I was designing this device, it originally, at least in my PhD research, it was specific to golf and athlete performance. But now that I'm done with my program, it sounds bad, but there's not really a business in just solving first tee jitters, right? This goes beyond, just athletes with anxiety. If this really works, there's millions of people out there that could benefit from this somehow. And that's what I'm doing full time right now. Is we've stopped pursuing so much the athletic, anxiety data. I will always be in that space somehow, some way. But in the very beginning stages, we have to be very clinical if we want to convince the FDA that this is a medical device. So we're focused on, clinical anxiety populations such as PTSD. And on our website, we actually have a video. A couple of years ago, ESPN came out, and they heard about our research we were doing at ASU, and they came out and they featured us in one of their 30 for 30 documentaries that was specifically focused on, the mental side of human performance and what's the future look like and things like that. And in that episode, a friend that I made kind of in this whole process, he's an ex-military veteran who served some time overseas and had some, pretty intense, encounters out there that left him with PTSD. And he's also a golfer, and golf has kind of been his thing to treat his PTSD. And him and I connected, played some golf, and he's been using my device. And he was the featured guy in our ESPN episode. If you or anybody listening ever wants to go check that out. But it's just cool to see that. So in that episode, they kind of documented his use of it. He would use it when he'd go out and play. He was competing in this putting tournament as part of the episode. So he would use the device during the tournament, but also just talked about how in general, in his everyday life, when his, PTSD would kick in and he'd have these anxiety, almost like anxiety attacks, he would use the device and it would give him relief, like right when he needed it. Of course, I don't want to give any medical advice here, but one of our goals is we want to stop it right when it's about to happen so that you don't have to take your medication, ultimately. Now, I will never tell anyone stop taking your medication until, we have clear evidence that it works. But even then, it's like medication works for a lot of people. A lot of people need it. But a lot of people don't need it, and they might want to try something before, medication. And this is a great, alternative to try as a first line, especially those that have severe conditions like PTSD or, other disorders.
Well, it's exciting, Nick, because I look at it this way. Going back to golf for a second, I can remember over the years. A few golfers, one particular that came to mind, and I'm sure you're familiar with them, but Ian Baker Finch, talked about some of the anxieties and the pressure that he felt. And, of course, he was a tour winner and played on the PGA Tour for a number of times. And he ultimately ended up getting out of golf, and of course now he's, you'll find him, in the announcer's booth on some of the tournaments when his network is picking it up. But he was one of the examples I remember. All of a sudden, he was pretty young still. I think he was in his early 40s, if I'm not mistaken. And suddenly, he stopped playing the game. And I was kind of scratching my head because I used to follow him, when he was playing on the PGA Tour, and I always thought he was a good player and great ball striker and all the rest. And suddenly he stopped playing, and he said, he started developing, much like you talked about, a lot of anxiety. And parts of his game, his putting, for instance, really let him down. And we always joke and say he had the yips and all that kind of stuff. But the truth of the matter is, what it really was is he was starting to have anxiety, and it got the better of him. And at that time, there wasn't really a lot of there wasn't even a lot of medications on the market at that point. It was still very new, and ultimately he stopped playing on the tour. So again, obviously you're pursuing a much bigger goal than just golf, but it's something that I think that again a lot of golfers struggle with. And again, just to add again a disclaimer for those listening, we're certainly by no means suggesting that you suddenly stop taking medications if you're on them, and you should always consult with your physician before you do anything. But I think this is a great product, if you will, a device that you're trying to introduce to the market. And I understand, from discussions that you and I have had before, again, obviously part of it to go through the FDA clearance and that you're actually putting together some trials, I guess you would call them, where you're going to actually allow people to sort of experiment. Is that it's still in process? And if so, can you update us on that?
Sure. So it's going to take quite a bit of clinical research and data collection in order to convince the FDA that this is a safe and effective device. We know it's a safe and effective device, but the FDA they have such high standards that it just takes years to get these things cleared and approved. But we've performed a couple studies, and right now we're in the middle of one study where people that are in the Phoenix area can come to our lab and use the device as part of a clinical study. It takes about an hour. There's certain tasks they have to do as part of the study, and then we give them the treatment, or they use the device for 10 minutes, and then they do another task, and we just kind of measure their performance before and after. And so right now that's the best way for people if they want to try the device. We are right now. It's taking a lot longer than I originally anticipated, but we are planning a larger clinical trial at the moment that will be multi-center, across the country. We've been talking to a lot of different clinics and hospitals and health organizations to try to decide what is the best location to run this trial that will give us access to the patients that need this most. And it's complicated, man. It's not as simple as just making a phone call and saying, "Hey, you interested?" "Yeah, I'm interested." It's like there's so much money involved and regulation involved, and it's challenging. Mostly, because we're a small startup, right? It's really just me working on this, and we've got advisors, and I've got another team of engineers, but it's just a process, man. It takes time, and we want to do it right. We don't want to just rush this thing to market. We want to make sure that we have the right data and that it is safe and that it is going to work for the people that we market it to when we're ready to get there. But it just takes time. So.
Yeah, and again, we want again, the reason I really wanted to have you on the show is because I find it very interesting what you're proposing here with this device. Because again, in being in the golf industry and knowing so many people as well in the industry, this is a big thing. This is anxiety. Performance anxiety is a huge thing in all walks of life, not just in golf, of course. And sometimes some of the alternatives, and you've studied, I'm sure, many of them, including, drugs and so forth and other, perhaps medical devices to sort of test the waters a little bit. But this is a huge issue in really all walks of life. So for you to be able to come up, and especially in this day and age where, you're not hooking people up to, a major machine or something, and to be able to have it basically in the palm of your hand and be able to help with some of these issues is really potentially a breakthrough. And I think it's going to be very, very successful. And again, as you pointed out, it's a process, and it's a lengthy process. But I think athletes and obviously professional golfers, and ultimately even the recreational golfers, very likely are going to benefit from your studies and your all of the trials and so forth that you're going through once it gets to market. But I thought it was worth sharing because, again, the mental side of the game has become really in the forefront now of golf. For so long we focused on the swing and all these different swing theories and getting the picture perfect golf swing. But now, they're realizing that, certainly you got to have a general understanding and a competence with the fundamentals. But the truth of the matter is, it's what's going on in the 6 inches between your ears, dictates whether you're going to be successful out in the golf course. And you found that out firsthand in your experience playing golf at a competitive level, and recognized that, hey, something, needs to happen here. And you've put forth the effort to do that. And I give you high marks for doing that. Even though you don't need them, you've got a PhD, but nevertheless, I think you've done some great, interesting work here. And I think you're onto something. And I think it's great. So Nick, as we kind of get here to wrap up, because I know it's very difficult, we don't have the product here, and again, you have to be careful because of, it's not at this point FDA approved. But if people want to learn more and maybe get more information, can they go to your website to maybe see the video, as you mentioned earlier, and maybe get more information? And also if they want to reach out to you, if they're interested in learning more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Just, quickly, I don't want to get people overly excited about anything. This device is not going to solve all of their anxiety problems, right? Anxiety is something that, we don't really know, like, what causes it. It's more of a symptom of some other thing. And it's always going to be around, but the way that I kind of see this is it's a great tool to have. I don't necessarily think this will really ever replace, other tools like mindfulness and meditation, visualization, talking to a therapist. Talk therapy is great. And even medication, right? Some people just need medication. But, it's just a great tool to have for a lot of people when they need quick, drug-free anxiety relief. And regarding, golf performance, again, it's not going to make you, the best golfer you possibly can be just by using the device. You still got to go out and practice.
Right.
You got to put in all your hours.
Right.
And that, that's another thing that I learned about the brain is how the brain processes information. There's a lot of interesting thoughts I've developed recently about how we can optimize our practice routine rather than just, going out there and just working on the thing we need to work on, and, talking positive thoughts to yourself. It's like, well, we can really optimize it. And especially when you have, technologies like mine that interface with the brain, we can, make your practice sessions even better. But, there's a lot of work a lot of work we still have to do before we really figure everything out. But it's an exciting future, no doubt. Going to be a lot of interesting things coming. But regarding my device and what we're working on, yeah, you can go to my website, hoolestpt.com. That's HOOLEST, pt.com, Hoolest Performance Technologies. And yeah, really the best way is just fill out the form on our website. The form goes directly to my email. And then I just email people that are interested and just want to have a conversation or something. So that's the best way to learn more.
Perfect. Well, and I think, Nick, it's a, as I've said a number of times, I think it's a very interesting technology that you've been working on, and I think that once it the adjustments and modifications and whatnot, and goes through the process and does get to market, I think it sounds like it's going to be very, very helpful for a lot of people. And as you pointed out, and a sort of additional disclaimer, it's not going to be the magic sauce that's suddenly going to give you a scratch handicap. You've still got to go and put the work in. But this may alleviate for the average golfer, and obviously for competitive golfers, a little bit of that anxiety edge, if you will, sort of level that out a little bit better to make it. And it may be something that works in conjunction with some sort of a protocol or even a program where it works in conjunction with your product as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds as the future goes on, and I hope that you'll keep me abreast, if you will, and also if anybody is interested, I'm assuming if as the trials and whatnot, or as some of the testing continues on, and if people are interested or want to become involved, you'll make that available on your website as well if people want to reach out and maybe participate or what have you. But Nick, I want to thank you very much for coming on. It's been an interesting discussion, and I've learned a lot, and I think you're onto something here. And again, I know it's a little ways away yet, and we're not quite there, but I think you've got something here that could benefit a lot of people, not just golfers.
I hope so. I know I one day want to use this thing, get back out on the golf course and compete again. We'll see if I can use this to my advantage. But I really appreciate you inviting me on here. This is fun. Never done one of these shows before, so I'm excited to do this for the first time and talk about golf, and maybe one day we can do it again in the future. Well,
keep me abreast of as things progress, and I will definitely have you on once things have moved along a little further, and you can give us maybe share some exciting news as we progress along, and I think it's great. Again, I can't emphasize enough. We're not trying to suggest that this is the cure or anything, but it's certainly one more piece of the puzzle that can certainly maybe open the doors a little bit more for people and dealing with some of the performance anxieties that they're experiencing. And it's certainly exciting in the early stages to hear about it. So I'm glad that you came on and shared it with my audience tonight. And I hope they'll go and check out your website. Again, it's the hoolestpt.com. It's HOOLESTPT.com. And there's a form at the bottom that you can, if you want to get more information or if you want to reach out to Nick and learn more about it, you can fill out that form, and he'll, as he said, he'll get back to you. But Nick, thank you very much for joining me tonight on Golf Talk Live, and please stay in touch and let me know as things progress. I'll be more than happy to have you come back on when you're ready to share some more news.
Awesome. Yep. Thanks a lot, Ted. Really appreciate it.
All right. Have a great rest of your week and great weekend, and keep me posted.
Thanks. Will do.
All right. Thanks, Nick. Bye-bye. All right. That was my very special guest, Nick Hool, founder of Hoolest Performance Technologies. And as we've been discussing here for the last almost an hour, talking about a new technology that he studied and has really been working on since attending Arizona State University, and has already had organizations like ESPN reach out expressing some interest, and was featured in a video which you can get on his website. You can go and check it out there and hopefully learn a little bit more. And we'll certainly have Nick back on in the future show as I mentioned, as things progress and he gets a little bit more involved and things come to a head, if you will. But I want to thank also the gang on the earlier round of the Coach's Corner panel, John Decker, Peter Agazarian, and Alex Fisher. Thanks, guys, for always bringing your best to the panel discussions. I appreciate it very much. And once again, special thanks to this evening's guest, Nick Hool, from the Hoolest Performance Technologies. Thanks, guys, and thank you for tuning in and making Golf Talk Live a successful show, and I appreciate all of your well wishes and all of your continued support. So on that note, have a great week, everybody. God bless. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time right here on Golf Talk Live. Take care, everybody. Thanks for listening to this evening's broadcast of Golf Talk Live. Remember to tune in each week at blogtalkradio.com/Golf Talk Live. If you can't join us live, check out the on-demand section for previously aired broadcasts, or listen on any of the following social media platforms: iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, CastBox, TalkStream Live, and of course, Spotify. To get updates on future shows and upcoming guests, be sure to visit the show's Facebook page, Golf Talk Live Blog. You can also follow me on Twitter at Ted and Buck CEO. Remember to join me live each week for another great broadcast of Golf Talk Live. See you next time. This has been a production of the iGolf Sports Network.